thank you for everybody for taking the time out of your day to come and join us really early this morning. I'm Julie Degnan, Director of Furniture Advisory Services for CBRE. And I wanted to highlight a couple of points. You know, we're frequently asked about how did this all come about? And I'd love to tell you that it was some great aha moment where we saw something that sort of sparked this. But the reality is that about 4 years ago, CBRE launched Furniture Advisory Services. And what ended up happening, unbeknownst to us, is we really became the first project consultant to be able to see furniture from the vantage point of clients, manufacturers, dealers, project managers, and design firms. And what we kept hearing over and over again, there was this common thread of a lot of frustrations. And so what I did was I reached out to Contract Consulting Group, which is a research-led commercial furniture interiors strategy group, and said, does this have to be the case? Why is it that we are all just standing in quicksand and nobody seems to be helping us to move out of this? So what started as a conversation really between two people trying to talk about a 30 and 40-year-old process that seems to be infused with a lot of frustrations and pain for everybody involved, quickly turned into a larger conversation. So to give you an idea of how that conversation has expanded and the number of people that have gotten behind this movement and spent a lot of time with it, I'd like to ask the people who were on the first Furniture Forum panel to please stand. And if you could stay standing. And I would also like to ask everybody who was invited to be a guest of the panelists to help us with the planning sessions for the first forum planning sessions. If you could stand. Yeah, and stay standing. If you attended the first furniture forum, if you could stand. If you participated in filling out any of the forms post the Furniture Forum 1.0 to help us collect data on some of the new ideas that were presented to evaluate how they're working for the client, can you stand? If you have internally discussed the Furniture Forum and what it means for you, internally or externally, can you stand? Right. So the question of, can one conversation spark change? We're not sure yet, but we think this is a really good start. So thank you to everybody who's here. We're thrilled to have you participate, and we're looking forward to sharing this information and hearing your feedback. So I'd like to turn this over to Amanda and Suzanne, who will take it from here.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Amanda with Contract Consulting Group. I recognize a lot of faces here. So I am the founder of Contract Consulting Group and also a blogger for the Huffington Post. And I know many of you, so you know that my passion is really in studying this industry as a researcher from lots and lots of different angles and writing about what we're discovering, really looking at the future and kind of trying to make meaningful connections about changes that are coming in the future. So I'd also like to introduce my business partner, Suzanne.
Thank you. And really, this has been such a great adventure to be a part of. I really get excited about any time that we can start to drive change through conversations, activities. And what you're going to see when we walk you through, and all of you clearly have been involved in this, many of you, is that the approach taken really was one, not just let's talk about something, but let's dig in, let's explore, and let's create opportunities to drive change. And I think you're really going to see some of that in today's discussion.
So I really want to give some context to where we've been. And I know many of you, judging by how many of you were standing up, have been involved in this conversation. But just to give perspective to those few people in the room that were kind of sitting, this really started, as Julie said, with a conversation between she and I, and a lot of planning that really originated about a year ago this time. So there was a lot of planning that went in lead up to the first event. And the first event, our Chicago 1.0, which was titled Unraveling Furniture Frustrations, was really an internal discovery. We had various parties internal to the industry, including A&D, project managers, manufacturers, and dealers, and we really brought them together in kind of a series of discovery sessions, mapping their process, talking about where what the pain points were, and that culminated in a presentation that many of you attended on April 20th. Since then, and because of popular demand, we launched the 2.0 process. And the 2.0 process really came from demand from all of you, saying that was great, but we need to go a little bit deeper. Let's try some of these ideas, let's test them out, let's talk about it together and figure out what we learned. And about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3, we got together with, I think there was a group of about 20 of us that really kind of looked at a lot of the feedback from the forums that came in, people submitting forums saying, this is what we tried, this is what worked, this is what didn't. And really coming together and saying, here's what we've learned from that. Simultaneous to that, though, we also launched a couple of other processes, which you can see in here. We launched this in DC. So some people said, maybe this is just a Chicago thing, maybe this isn't industry-wide. So we kind of took this to another market. We went to DC, which was just presented 2 weeks ago, and we really followed the same process that we did in Chicago 1.0 of mapping the pain points with these industry constituents. But we also knew we wanted to hear from the clients. We wanted to really understand what their experience was like. So as part of that, we also overlaid these client interviews. And that was actually just Suzanne and I talking one-on-one. Most of them were 30-minute interviews by phone. Actually, Julie doesn't even know who all we talked to because we wanted to keep it very confidential so these people would feel very comfortable really sharing their honest experiences. And we've summarized that, and some of you have read some of the articles that have come out around 5 key client pain points. And that's what we're going to be building our presentation around today. So it's important just to know really all that's gone into this, and probably literally thousands of people have really constructed the conversation that you're going to hear today. And our job is to get thousands of conversations and literally a year's worth of research into about 40 minutes. So wish us luck.
Hold tight. So as Amanda said, really this mapping of the pain points was probably one of the biggest moments of awareness for just about everybody involved in the furniture bidding process. So what we did in each of these was we asked each of the groups, architecture, dealer, manufacturer, and project management, to map their process, where they're involved in the furniture bidding and where there were pain points. And we presented back to one another. And really when we collected information from those involved in that process, they said, that is where I learned so much. That was wonderful awareness building for me and where and how I can drive change. What we did after that was CCG took all of these maps and we overlaid them to see where we are identifying the pain points. And what you see here, the orange indicates where there were pain points in time spent or money overlaid. And you can see there's really almost a roll down in these pain points, kind of coming down to the dealer.
All the dealers in the room are laughing.
And we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about these pain points, and we're going to go through ideas to alleviate a lot of this.
So one of the interesting things, and we mentioned this in the 1.0 forum too, is if we had had this conversation 10 years ago, probably a lot of these pain points, a lot of these discussions would be the same, right? Some of you are nodding right now. But there are really 2 factors that are really driving these conversations to the forefront. So the first is that ancillary isn't ancillary anymore. And that is really, as we, if you look at how this industry was originally founded, is on kind of common standards, driving volume to one manufacturer. And what's happening now is on any average project, the average number of manufacturers is going up. The average number of manufacturers a typical dealer works with in a given year has gone up. So really, we're getting much, much more complex. Add to that, simultaneously, what's happening with our culture is kind of this Amazon mindset. It's interesting, we just wrapped up a project where we were interviewing a lot of GCs, and a lot of them, one of the common things that they were saying was the typical project that would take 12 weeks is now expected to take 10. People have kind of this cultural mindset that things should happen faster. So as complexity is going up, these timelines are going down, and it's really creating this pinch point that's pushing these conversations to need to happen sooner and help us address some of these issues. So I want to go a little bit deeper into kind of this client experience. And again, this is a voice that we're going to overlay throughout the rest of this presentation. And these interviews, when we talk to these clients, we talk to companies big and small. We talk to experienced furniture buyers that do this for a living and purchase on a regular basis. And we also talk to clients who had this land in their lap. We all know these clients who have a real job besides and then get this furniture and build out piece thrown in their lap. And there were a lot of really common threads in this. And I think one of the important things to talk about here is because we're hitting on a lot of pain points, we don't want to make ourselves sound more painful than we are. But most of these clients were really happy. Most of them were really said, things were good. Like, tell us about your project. And they started out, things were good. But once we dug deeper, what we discovered is, Even though we've really mastered the art of delivering product on time, to budget, with, of course, some exceptions that we heard a lot about, but what we really have not mastered is the client experience. And there's a lot that we can do as an industry to really make this better for our clients. So I want to call your attention to the handout that was on your chairs. So this is really a map for the rest of the presentation that we're going to take you through. We're going to really base this on 5 key client pain points, and we're going to be presenting to you a toolkit of ideas. And again, this is not a prescriptive solution, but these will be some ideas. So for each of these, I'll talk about the pain point and why, and then Suzanne will kind of talk about some of the ideas on the back, highlight a few of them, and we're going to invite some of the panelists that participated in the 2.0 session, because I believe that's a big reason why you're here. We want to hear what they've tried, what's working. So we're going to kind of interweave some stories from people who have participated to hear what's worked for them. So the first one is that the process can be frustrating, confusing, and time-consuming. And really, if you look at the way that our process unfolds today, often the A&D firm is starting without a set budget. So we're kind of, it's like ready, set, go, only it's go, ready, set sometimes. And what that leads to is a lot of rework. So they start, we give you ideas, the client approves them, and then we end up throwing it out. It's almost like baking a cake, and then at the end we realize the cake's flat, and it's not like we can rework that cake because it's already been baked. So we have to start over again. So Suzanne's going to talk us through some of the ideas that this collective group, and again, this is both cities and the 2.0 process, has come up with to really alleviate these.
Yes, so what you're seeing here, as Amanda said, this is a toolkit of ideas. Different ideas that have been pulled together from everyone involved in these conversations. We're not going to go through, dig into each of these. A lot of them are very self-explanatory, but we're going to touch on a couple. So the first one is establish and communicate budget early. This was a resounding, very necessary piece to the puzzle. When you looked at that map of pain points and you see that trickle down, you noticed on the front end, everybody had orange and a pain point. It was really because of this trying to hit a target without knowing what you're aiming for, really impossible to do. And that is really starting to drive a lot of this rework, is not having clear transparency into that. Another opportunity that we want to explore and talk about is onboarding consultants, dealers early in the process. Early in the process to really establish team, establish communication around pricing, options, and what that can mean. And I'm going to invite Jill Stewart with Hayworth to come up, because this really is an area that she has really delved into with all of the panelists and other peoples from 2.0 who have participated, and is going to share some of the insights that she's gleaned in testing some of these concepts. Thank you, Jill.
Yeah. Good morning. So in 8 months of research, we're going to do this in 2 minutes, right? So we had a prep yesterday, totally bombed it. So in essence, what we're going to do in the 8 months, we've really been experimenting, right? Taking all of these ideas, sheltering through the process, and really seeing what's worked, where the pain is in the new process, and looking at what we can do different. And we've done this now. I was fortunate enough to go to DC to hear some of their feedback, and it overlays almost identically. So when we look at the new process, and I'm going to speak to 6 projects that I benchmarked, 3 in the standard format, where the dealer's onboarded after the major RFP, right? You get the 90 pages, and then you go into this rework that we talked about. 3 are going to be in the new process. And in the new process, the dealer and the manufacturer onboarded early. So what that means is the budget is set within reason, right? There's holdback. We know that. But the big thing is goals are set too, because the budget is based on what the client's goals are. And many times we don't know those. When we get the RFP, we have no idea what the areas of importance are. We have no idea what they're trying to achieve. We look at the discipline of the client and go, well, they're a law firm. This must be important. We have no idea what that CEO is trying to drive through possibly innovation. So those 2 milestones in Chicago and DC were consistent. If we know the budget and we know the goals, we can have an enhanced experience for all of us around the table. And when I say all, I'm speaking to every discipline that's at that table. So one person in the audience that I talked to, because I've talked to many of you, said, Jill, this was interesting. The client actually presented to us their goals. We got to ask the client about what their goals were and how they wanted to overlay them. Imagine that world, right, where we all understand what those goals are. So that was one thing. Now the budgets, we're working in real time at the front end, usually around the GC's perspective when the GC gets onboarded. We're working on budgets. In real time, we can look at what they're trying to achieve and design in real time with the firm to ensure that what they're trying to achieve is maintained. It then goes to a mini RFP. Because the one thing we heard from the manufacturer and dealer side is those 100 pages that we prepare that take on average 270 hours, they look at 5 pages, right? The pricing page and the typicals. They don't read the rest of it. And it's because there isn't an opportunity to interview. So in the new world, they're given an opportunity to interview. They're given an opportunity to do a mini RFP, which is concise. It's on the main, usually the systems portion, 40% average of the floor plate, and they're at the table with a real budget. The amount of rework has been cut by 2/3 when you take the standard RFP to the mini RFP and the 3 to 3 we benchmarked. 2/3. Now, the front end is loaded. So for those of you in this room that I've talked to, they're like, do you know how many hours, though, Jill, I've spent on the front end? Yeah, I do, because I've sat in a lot of those meetings. It is way more than historically you would, but when you look at the duration of the project and the fact that you're at the table and it's your project, and yes, you're working in tandem with the design firm, I can give you the statistics on how much time you're saving. Now, on the middle of the project, we had an example where they got to ancillary, and they said, well, you know, we get to budgets, because that's come up a lot, right? Budget. And it's really where you go to a good, better, best format, and understanding back to the goals, what's important. Where are those special spaces? Is it the we space? Do you have a flex space that is really in 2 years where you're going to put your growth? Maybe that's where you can put the less expensive product that your dealer can pull for you, that you don't need that quality there, right? You know that in 2 years that might become something else. When they're at the forefront, they can do that at the table versus reworking later. So all of those enhancements, and I've got pages that I've been tracking with a lot of you in this room, equated to about 33.5% for all disciplines in time, energy, money saved. Okay, so that's all facets throughout. So it's a fascinating discussion that if you just pull a couple things and apply them, how much we're saved. And I think the thing we all have to remember here is that if we don't figure this out and innovate for ourselves, what this panel's been talking about is somebody's going to do it for us. So when we look in this room, this is the best and the brightest of the 3rd largest market in the country. We've got the opportunity to do it.
Thank you, Jill. Wonderful, wonderful examples. And really what this kind of summation is, this early vetting and assembling this team early really results in fewer surprises, better alignment to delivering projects on time and on budget, which is really what we know that our clients' really end state goal is all about and rooted in.
Good. So the second one we're going to talk about is pricing is confusing. And again, if you look at that front page of your handout, one of the funny things about this one, you notice most of them start with this can be, that can be. This one, pricing is confusing, right? And we all know this. But really what this creates is kind of a rabbit hole that we go into that's at the core of a lot of mistrust. And if we had one buzzword that was like the most frequently said word, we keep joking that we could play a drinking game with the word transparency. And we would all have a problem from these sessions if we had been playing that game. But this idea of transparency is really at the core of a lot of mistrust. And we heard about this transparency issue both in these kind of, I'll call them internal working sessions between A&D, manufacturer, dealer, and project manager, and from the client interviews, just saying, like, how can it be possible that pricing fluctuates that much? So we want to dig into a little bit of why that is. And I think one of them is that there's just no frame of reference, right? For the pricing structure, the way this industry is run, there's no frame of reference in any other buying process that buyers go through or any of us as consumers go through. The second one is that pricing fluctuates so much from manufacturer to manufacturer that there's really just no yardstick to kind of gauge, like, is this a good price or isn't this a good price? I mean, I guess if you've been in this industry for a long time, you kind of might have that internally, a gut check, but especially these clients were really confused by that. And the third thing was, coming down to, and we heard some of this when we talked to these clients in these interviews, is when they're asked to write the check, they get the 200-page printout, right, of 200 line items, and they're expected to sign off. And what do you mean you didn't catch that? Like, it would be as if you're buying an automobile, And they gave you a printout of every lug nut and chassis and door handle and hinge, and you were expected to say, is this right or is it not? So the process in total is very confusing and frustrating for us internally and for our clients. Now we know we're not going to take care of list pricing. That's probably not going away from this room. And we're probably not going to get rid of the alignments, which also adds to all of that. But what we can do is talk about some different approaches that can help the pricing structure seem a little bit more simple.
Yep, absolutely. So 2 additional ideas to add to the toolkit. One is around really speaking and presenting pricing in per square foot. So everything else, every other component related to a office relocation, office build out is really spoken in cost per square foot. It starts from your rent rates, the build out, all sorts of things. And furniture is early on from a project management standpoint, and then it changes. So when we start to get into budgeting, it's really, here's how much each of these items cost. And so what we explored is, could we come up with some ways to transition the way that we present options and pricing to our clients so that it is in cost per square foot, so that as they're making the decisions around the design and the investment of, do we add an internal stair, or does that mean we get to have the beautiful classic pieces in our lobby, they can make informed decisions. Another very important element to everything we're talking about here today is exploring new pricing models. So this is something that we as an industry, as we look at these potential shifts and when we onboard different providers in this process, we are going to need to get creative in exploring different and new ways to approach pricing. So I'm going to ask Heidi McClanahan with
Teresa.
Teresa Williams, excuse me, with Nelson, to come up and share some of her experience. Heidi's eyes were like, what? I'm not talking about that. But please, Teresa, if you can share.
All right, I'm Heidi today. I just want to tell you a story today. So I think we're with this client, we win this project, we're excited, we're at start project meeting, and the client looks over and says, I am dreading this. This is painful, it takes up so much of my time, and I'm like, okay, this is great. Guess what? Our industry is talking. We are hearing you, and we're talking about this. So I've got some ideas. Let's talk about the B word at the moment, budget. Do you have one? Do you know what it is? Is it under a rug somewhere? Is it smoke and mirrors where we've got this one, but there's really this one hiding off in the corner? But she actually did have a budget. The client had a budget. We dialed that budget down to a cost per square foot. I thought, okay, let's figure out what this is. We know what square footage we're dealing with. It's $25. Okay, we can do that. The client says, but I don't know what $25 looks like. And I said, okay, we can show you that. Just to get a comfort level. So we went to spaces that ranged from the low 20s to the low 30s, just to get a gauge here. Is 25 right? Does it feel right to you? And sure enough, she said, I liked what I saw in the mid-20s. I'm pretty comfortable there. I don't need to go up into that higher level here. What I saw in the lower 20s, I'm not, I feel like I'm sacrificing some things here that I'm not willing to do. And so we said 25, great. Now what? So we went to the Mart to see some things, touch and feel, invited dealers, yes, we invited dealers, to be at those showrooms. And it was more about getting to know the people, seeing some ideas. I said things are gonna look similar, we get that. And we narrowed this down to 3 manufacturers and dealers, and we interviewed. Picked a partner. And then what happened was, this is happening in schematic design, we picked the partner, Nelson and the dealer sat in a room and said, we've got $25. We've got a plan, we've got quantities, how are we gonna get there? Let's dissect this. This is what we're thinking from a design intent, we're just getting into this. Let's look at what we can spend in reception. Let's look at what that means for a budget for a task chair. Let's look at what that means for the greater percentage of the benching and the private office component. And we were able to really work hand in hand with our dealer to dissect what $25 meant. So then when we were in the schematic design presentations and the design development presentations, we were able to confidently show something that met design intent, that meant a budget, and that we weren't going to have to go back and do this whole rework thing, and it costs all of us money to do that. And what else does it do? It's a big pain point for that client that said, I'm dreading this process. So in the end, that client said, oh my gosh, you proved me wrong. We liked this process and we had fun doing it. So that's my story.
Thank you so much.
And Teresa will be up next.
Thanks, Teresa. So really, as Amanda said, we kind of joke at every time we talk about this, we could really have a drinking game with the word transparency, but transparency around pricing for the team and for the client is just so critical to empower our clients to make decisions in a timely fashion. And that's really what a lot of this is rooted in and about trying to achieve.
So the next one we're going to talk about is that communication can be a game of telephone. And this is the idea that oftentimes the furniture teams are kind of kept at bay, and communication goes from the client to the PM to the A&D firm, and then to the furniture team, and then they get their answer, and then it goes back again. And you can imagine, just like the childhood game of telephone, when you do that forward and back, by the time it gets back, the answer might not be the same. And this was discussed both on kind of our internal exploration, and the clients recognize it in a lot of our client interviews. So there's a lot that we can do here to improve that process.
Yeah, so again, adding to this toolkit, and when we talk about how do we make this game of telephone go away, one of the biggest ones we came up with was really aligning the team around the client objectives. And how do we really do that? It's communicating to them early, but not just how do we communicate, but how do we get the team together early in order to choose the right partners that we're sharing those things with. So Heidi is now going to come up and share a great case study that she has been experiencing. Thank you, Heidi.
Hi, I'm Heidi McClenahan. I recently had a project where we hired the furniture dealer and the manufacturer together through an interview process based on personality and service. It was not based on product or cost. We went through the interview process. We narrowed it down to 2 dealer and manufacturer relationships, and ended up sending out a mini RFP, similar to what was spoken to about earlier, on the workstation and the private office typicals. We performed tours, and when we got all the results back, we realized that the cost of the product was really the same. And the client made a decision on who they were going to be using based on the people that they met and the things that they saw. But it wasn't necessarily the furniture that they would be using in their own space. The best part about being a project manager at this stage in the game was that we were only in programming. So this completed our team. Our team was complete. We had our experts at the table, and we knew that if there are any problems or issues, that we have the right people to answer them. And so fast forward, we get the private office specification, and they happen to be sit-to-stand desks, and the leg was concealed in the credenza. And the problem was that we didn't know how to access the power and data in this situation. So we all came into a room. It was the general contractor, the architect, myself, and the furniture dealer. And we kind of tossed around a lot of different ideas, trying to figure out what made the most sense. And really the answer was simple. We understood where we were going to place the power and data along the wall, and then what kind of cutout we were going to have in the furniture. That situation happened because we all worked together. I think if the furniture dealer hadn't been empowered to be at the table with all of us, maybe it would have been a furniture solution that was a custom component or an add-on piece that would have cost time and money. Or we would have moved in and we couldn't have accessed the power and the data, and then, and then we had to deal with that in the field. I don't know, but what I do know is that this was super early in the process. We got together at design development, and everybody knew exactly what to do, when they needed to do it, super early in the process.
Thank you, Heidi. Great example. A lot of what we talked about around a lot of these ideas is building trust amongst the team, so that we're working in tandem to really innovate, and really deep through thinking around how we bring the best client outcomes to the table.
So our fourth is that the options can be overwhelming. And when you look at, we really are producing custom furniture. And we've talked to some of our friends at the major manufacturers who have estimated that most of the majors have somewhere between 6 and 14 billion, and yes, that's billion with a B, SKUs, right? So that's just the different numbers. So now you multiply that by how many options you can create by putting these pieces together, and you can see why options are overwhelming. But we heard stories. One of my favorite stories came from one of our DC panelists who talked about a client that she had where there were mock-ups, whole room full of mock-ups. It was open office, private office, and even some tables. And the client walked through and said, "The furniture looks great." She said, "Well, those are still 3 different options." And the client had no idea, right? So even though we can do all this different stuff, to the, untrained eye or to the naked eye, most people can't quite differentiate one from another. So it's really looking at how do we put context to this to help our clients, because there's not time in a typical process to educate everyone on all of those literally probably trillions of options that we could create. But it can be a very overwhelming experience for our client, just trying to understand what they need and what's important.
Yeah, so again, adding to some of these ideas, it's really how do we empower the dealer to be a client advocate? They really are the subject matter experts around what are all of these components that can be assembled to create the best solution. And so Julie Degnan is going to come up and share some of her experiences with empowering the dealer and aligning to options.
She's brought a friend.
I'm bringing a guest. An unscripted friend. So to Suzanne's point, so I worked on a project in which, per the client's direction, they said, we are going to have the dealer on board early. We want the dealer on board right after programming. So we issued an RFP, and the dealer comes on board right away, and we sit down with the project manager, the client, the dealership, and we start to take a look at the 4 different workstation typical options and the 3 different private office typical options. And all of them were created by the design firm, so that we know they all meet the programmatic and design intent. And then the client starts to ask questions about, could we take components from option number 3 and put them in option number 1? What happens? And what was really fascinating to watch was the exchange between the dealer and the client, where they said, yeah, we can do that, but we've now taken your 60-inch panel, we now need 2 30s, which means your cost is going to jump up. Not that the client needed to make a decision on it at that point, but at least he understood that if he wanted to create that blend, there was an immediate cost uptick. So I also want to introduce you to Kelly Stratinger, who is with CIBC. And Kelly was the client who had us go down this path, because I thought it would be interesting for you to hear from his perspective what he saw as the benefits of going this route.
So when I looked at all the pain points, I really experienced all of those. I come from a leasing background. I don't know a lot about furniture. I've learned a lot from our architects and dealer friends that are here. But what I really found out that I didn't really know much about furniture, and it is confusing. You know, coming from that leasing background, I thought I was really smart because I understood it, but I guess it's just because they reduced everything to per square foot. So the furniture was really a challenge. And we did sit, we had a budget, and we worked through these different options and kept tweaking it. And it's not so much that we stayed within budget, but I think we really ended up with a much richer solution. We talked through these, and the general contractor was there and layered on some of those costs. And we really had everybody at the table, and we're installing this week. So we're looking forward to that real solution.
So good luck to that dealer.
Thank you both. That is such a great example. And really, this goes into this informed team. The team members really can leverage the knowledge of the client's needs to ensure the best possible solution. And that's a great example of doing that early in schematic design.
Good. So our 5th and final pain point is that clients do not feel empowered with information. And my favorite example here, I'm not sure if any of you have ever shopped at Aldi, but when you shop at Aldi, it's a grocery store, for those of you who don't know, their cashiers are actually incented to check you out as quickly as possible. So they're measured from that first item that scans until your payment is processed. And what it results in is, I am telling you, by the time you get your stuff up on the little conveyor belt and they're whipping it into your cart and then you're pushing off your cart to bag your own groceries, it is so fast, you're left with this feeling like, what just happened? And so I feel like that is the way the furniture process feels to a lot of our clients, right? Because they're told, don't worry about furniture, it's very complex, you don't have to wait, there's a lot of other decisions that you have to make. So you're told, don't worry about it until later. And then by the time it hits, again, you add all this complexity in, it's like trying to load all your stuff up and everything's just happened so fast, they're left wondering what happened. And we heard a lot about this in the interviews, where people just kind of said, it wasn't really regret, but it was like, if only I had known this, or maybe if I had made one more phone call, I could have had 2% less. It was almost this feeling of what didn't I know, and if I had been more empowered with information, what would I have done differently? And most of them were not sure. So we felt like this was a huge opportunity to explore.
Yes, absolutely. So 2 ideas here. One is really leveraging the manufacturers to understand what are trends, what are some of the things they're seeing. A lot of the manufacturers do a tremendous amount of research, and the clients don't see that until quite later in the process and kind of wonder, well, could we be exposed to that earlier so that we are making better decisions, more knowledgeable? Secondly is looking at how do we build shared perspective in the industry. So this goes back to that mapping process, as I mentioned very, very early, was a major aha of awareness for a relatively small group of people within our industry. And so a lot of this came out as how do we share this perspective and these roles and our responsibilities and all of this so that we can better align and bring better outcomes. So I'm going to ask Scott Delano right here, I'm going to come up. He's been instrumental in really diving into this topic. So he's going to share some of his experiences with us today.
Thanks.
Thanks, Scott.
So one of the things that was interesting working with both the Chicago group and the DC group was that this group of architects and PMs and dealers and manufacturers, and that's the 4 that were in the room, all talking through the pain points was that we had pain points in the same places. Not that we all had pain points, that was not a shock, but that we all had them at the same times, which then made it seem like we only have to solve for these problems. So in that discussion, though, what we learned was we each have an expertise, we each have information to bring, and that we need to respect that and allow that to be brought to the table, because each of us were frankly swimming in other people's swim lanes and trying to overreach just a bit, right? So if we keep it in mind that what we're trying to do is be at the best benefit for our client, and we trust each other, and we depend on each other to bring the expertise that we have, we wind up with a cohesive team. And that team can bring better results in the same time frame, instead of having to do the rework where I think it's something and you think it's something and she thinks it's something, and then suddenly the client has 9 things when all they wanted was 1, right? And so looking at that and understanding that we are a team and we're doing it for the client is really important. And that's something that is a little bit of a shift because it's not how we were set up in the current process. So that's a lot of what this tries to address. So a very quick story, because I know we're tight on time, which is hard for me. So in a recent working with a client, what we had was early on, we explained this new process that we wanted to try. She was on board, she said, great, let's give it a try. We brought the dealer on in the beginning, and they sat at the table to understand what the needs were. Now, the architect still drove the overall functionality and the overall look of the space, but the dealer was able to bring solutions that met that based on their deep experience and their deep research within the realm of the manufacturer. So there were things that we didn't know about because that's not our job to know every single thing, right? But what we do need to know is how to leverage those things for the client to create the environment that supports their needs. And so by everybody at the table bringing their best expertise, we were actually able to finish with 2 weeks less time on the design portion of the project, which everyone says, great, I can take 2 weeks out of the schedule. No, don't do that. What it did, though, was it gave us that 2 weeks worth of time to refine the solutions in a way that was better. So the client got a better experience at the end, and really what we want is better experiences for clients, not faster, not cheaper. At the end of the day, they want something exceptional, and it's our job to get them there.
Thank you so much, Scott. I think the biggest thing I take away about that and what we heard from the clients, they're very happy overall, but they really want to feel like they have an advocate. And that description really does align to what we heard about. Who is my advocate overall? It's everyone at the table together, cohesiveness.
Good. So those are our 5 pain points and all of our ideas, again, developed from this collective group. But I think one of the things that was really a struggle for us was even to match these ideas up with the specific pain points, because really, this is not one specific process. This is not something that we're going to dictate that everybody should now do this differently. This is really a toolkit of ideas from which you can select what meets the needs for your unique project, for your unique clients, or for you as an individual. And so you'll also notice here we have your ideas here, because our hope is that this conversation doesn't stop here. Julie asked at the beginning, can one conversation drive change? And it really is up to all of us in this room to kind of do our part. So we hope that you take this information, that you try some of these ideas, and change has to start with all of us. So with that, I'm going to open up to questions. Who has the first question? We were that good, no questions. And we do have a select group of the participants in the 2.0 section that are kind of up here so they can elbow one another to help us talk about their specific experiences. Okay.
Yes, we have one in the back.
So can someone that has gone through the new process speak to, in the old process when you send out an RFP, you have people competing against each other. The new process, it seems like you're taking out that competition from the dealers. How did that work, and did you get the same kind of pricing that you would on the competitive scale?
Hi again. So one of the, and I don't know who that was, so I don't know who I'm talking to. Sorry. Hi. So we actually don't have a lack of competition. The competition actually happens earlier. And so we were talking about the sort of mini RFP. There's also, we've done it without an RFP at all, and just interviewing the team, because frankly, they interview the architects to figure out who they want to work with for a year through a difficult situation, right? And so it would be the same thing with the dealer, and so the dealer and the manufacturer partner, usually. And so what that just does is moves that discussion earlier, because ultimately, the product is going to meet their needs, frankly, regardless of who is making the product, because if we're clear on the needs, you will make sure they're met. We have no mystery about that, right? But what we do need to know is that you can work with a client, they can trust you, and they know that you'll be there, and that you have their back. And really, that interview winds up being more, and Teresa was talking about bringing on early, and having the conversation where they found the team that they wanted to work with, right? And so it does bring it to the front. And so you're not interviewing on the cost of the product, which is not always the most interesting thing to the client, but you're interviewing on the people who are going to be there for them, which frankly is more interesting at the end of the day, because you'll all meet the cost as well. So neutralizing the thing they don't care about and making sure that you're giving them the thing they do care about. Does that answer it?
Anybody else want to add to that? No? Okay, nice. All right, any other questions?
Here, we have one over here.
Across the 4 participants that you mentioned, is one more than another going to play more of a lead role in starting to utilize these toolkits, would you say?
Who wants to take that one?
It looks like from the groups up here representing all 4 is that no, not one group is leading this. And I've had some conversations with others in the room over the last few months is, you know, who is responsible for pushing these changes? And it's really collective of, it could be anyone coming to the table with this idea. The architect, the project manager, the manufacturer. We've heard it coming from any one of these 4 channels and the client as they're exposed more to process and opportunity. They may say, like to Kelly's point, let's do it differently. Yeah. Other questions? We welcome all of them.
So our terms and conditions state that we have to have a space free and clear so we can bring our product in, have the elevators. That never happens. So I'm wondering, bringing the GCs to really kind of close the loop, if that's kind of part of the next steps of the process.
I said, who's asking that question? They said, Dalton. You know, we've explored this GC piece, a lot of it, to be honest, and we're just not seeing how it funnels into the core of this discussion. Why we do think that there is a GC component regarding AV and IT, we just don't see it playing into the competitive furniture bidding process. The answer is no. So again, thank you to everybody for coming. We really do appreciate it, and we want to leave you on a good and bad news note. So the bad news is that we all inherited this process, and the bad news is that we've all perpetuated it. And the good news is that if we want to create change, we can do this with ourselves. So if everybody, the client, the project manager, the design firm, the dealer, the manufacturer is on board, we welcome you to try new ideas and see if you can create a different client outcome that also creates a better experience for your own teams. So thank you again for coming.